Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Quinn Small, CEO and co-founder of Drive. Thanks a lot for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So from the website, what I could see is Drive is like number one booking platform built for trades. Before you started working on Drive, let's go back to the early career days. Like what
hmm
led to this and what would be some highlights?
Yeah, really good question. So this journey kind of started when I was about 12 years old, actually. So my mother was when we were young. So I have three brothers, so four boys. And my mom was working kind of a high pressure sales job. And so there's a lot of days that we were, hiding in the little cubicle next to her desk, eating dinner while she was trying to finish up sales. And so we had a conversation at one point where, she thought there's an opportunity for me to find something else I can do that lets me better balance, being a mother of four and work. And so we talked about a few different options, getting back into real estate and a few things. And then selling window coverings came up. And so we decided, let's try to start a window covering business. So she became a Hunter Douglas dealer. And so at 12, we loaded up in our little green Ford Windstar rusty van, started hanging door hangers on Saturdays and Sundays, would go help do installs. And so that business eventually grew into a fairly large regional dealer. And so I spent most of my life in the window covering industry. And so from, like I said, hanging door hangers and then became a certified installer, motorization specialist for Hunter Douglas window covering. So went around the country helping doing automation systems, wiring diagrams, et cetera, for them. And so uh, was doing that for a while and then had a little stint in nonprofit world. So as executive director of an organization based here in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska, but we did work internationally. And so as executive director there, and then got into the tech world as a product manager. So worked at a large e-commerce company as a product manager. And so I did that until about 2020. And in 2020, came back into the family business as our CEO. And so at the time, COVID was creating this boon sort of for home improvement and home service businesses. So people were getting stimulus checks, they were working from home, they weren't traveling as much, so they're investing a lot of money into their homes, and so we saw a huge influx in demand. And so my goal and sort of the task that I had was. How do we keep up with the demand and capture the opportunity we have in front of us? And so, as I started looking at it, a lot of that all converged on our scheduling operations, essentially. And that's where the idea for Drive came from. Spent most of my life in home services and the trades. I did some general contracting stuff, general labor, and then eventually as the CEO was looking at kind of what's the highest leverage opportunity I have for us to streamline operations and make sure that we're set to capture all this demand and keep up. And that converged on our scheduling operations. So that's where I started trying to figure out how do we schedule better as a home service business, because we have team members that are, we had 35 team members and most of them are out in the field going from house to house to house, job site to job site to job site. And so a lot of our back office, their time was spent coordinating these schedules. And that felt like an opportunity for us to go, how do we scale revenue without scaling the back office? And that was a great place to start. So that's kind of where the impetus of Drive and the idea came from.
Can you share like what are the first 90 days look like?
Sure. Yeah. So it actually started with me just trying to solve the problem for myself. Right. And so what I started with was Calendly. So to me, it was obvious. I was like, okay, the solution for us right now is, if we can allow our customers to, especially from like a speed to lead standpoint. So if a customer has intent and they're saying, hey, I'm working at home now, I'm using this bedroom that we never use as my office. And I realized that like the arch window at from noon to 3 just the sun hammers the desk and I actually need to put something in that window, right? So they have intent to buy. That the quicker we can get to that lead, the more likely we are to actually close the job. And so we had a pretty good reputation and a decent amount of market share. The problem was that we had a lot of new dealers coming into the market. And so for us, because we had a pretty large operation, a lot of our team members were not sitting there waiting to answer the phone at 11 p.m. But Jim's blinds that just opened, he'd answer the phone and he'd show up in 20 minutes because he doesn't have anything else going on. And so we were losing more jobs because our speed to lead just wasn't there. And so I just thought, well, this sounds like a Calendly problem. This would be great. Kind of funny enough, what I didn't think about was that we have these team members that have been with us for 10, 15 years, and they're sort of like artists in scheduling and thinking about a map, right? So they're not just looking at, for an open slot on the calendar, they're looking at all the context around it to figure out, who should we send? Can we send them there? Where they're going from or coming from? Where they're going to? If I'm leaving a gap in the calendar, is it a big enough gap I can put another appointment in there, right? So their logistic brain that had been trained over 10 years was really efficient at scheduling, and Calendly doesn't do any of that. And so what happened is we tried Calendly. Calendly helped on the speed to lead standpoint and also reducing kind of the back office pressure that we had or work or to keep up with all this demand. The problem is that I just moved the problem from the office to the field because instead of our salespeople or installers taking 5 to 7 appointments a day or 3 to 5 appointments a day, they were spending way more time driving. And we had to just build in buffer times to account for arbitrary drive time because Calendly has no idea where they're at on the map, right? And so I was like, well, somebody has to have built one of these tools. We'll try Jobber, we'll try Service Titan, some of these other tools. They have some better tooling now, but especially at the time, they didn't have anything that also thought about drive time. And so what I did is I made my own sort of hack together, at this point, kind of proof of concept where it was Calendly, it was Airtable and Zapier, and we split up Lincoln and Omaha. So we're, like I said, in Lincoln, Nebraska. We have a location in Lincoln and in Omaha. We split up our kind of our big service area into 26 different zip code regions. And so we had a form. When they filled out the form, it would determine which zip code or which region their zip code fell into. And then we had a Calendly event type for each of those regions for every like type of appointment and duration that we would have. And so just to cover like 50% ish of our installations and measures, we had 96 Calendly event types running. And so anytime we had like an availability change, I'd have to go change 96 different Calendly events essentially. And the cool thing was it solved the problem. The problem was now is that it just wasn't scalable and I was the only one that knew how to maintain it. And so I kind of created a problem for myself because if I wasn't around to fix it, if it broke, if I got hit by a bus, a core part of our business was at a tremendous amount of risk because I was the only one that knew how to work it. And it just wasn't scalable or maintainable. I did the math on to cover all of our sales, all of our installs, all of our service and repairs, so like warranty work, and we'd be at like 400 Calendly event types. And it was like, well, this doesn't work. So that was kind of the first probably 90 days of getting to the point that I was, made the decision of like, hey, I think this is a problem we're solving and something needs to be built here. And so from there, I applied for a grant through the state of Nebraska. So through the Department of Economic Development. So they have a prototyping grant. So I was able to get that grant to build out a proof of concept and a prototype of it, and took on a little bit of venture capital funding from a group that invests at kind of the friends and family stage called Move Venture Capital. Shout out Charlie Cuddy and John Grange. They're awesome. And from there, found a contract dev team based out of Lincoln to build out the first version of Driive. So that was kind of the first little bit was me just tinkering and figuring out, I've got to solve this problem for me and realizing there's not a great solution for this, and decided to jump all in on building the solution.
Like from building the initial prototype yourself to finding a contract there, make it at production level. How were the customer discussions around that time going? The feedback, the concerns?
Yeah, good question. So what I did is I basically just created a network of industry people that I knew from kind of our partners at Custom Lines and Design, and started talking to them and just sitting down. And it was kind of twofold. On the one hand, I was like, there's probably a lot I could learn anyway. Like maybe this isn't a problem and we're just doing it in a way that just is uninformed and archaic. So started interviewing them and just learning how do they schedule. So would sit down and then from there, would say, hey, well, what if there's a tool that did this, right? And by do this, what I would say is, what if there's a tool that could both pre-qualify for you and could also schedule as well as your, seasoned scheduling coordinator? And they'd be like, well, that'd be great, right? But nothing's going to do that, right? Like we need a human in the loop. That's probably the biggest feedback that I would get then, and I still get today when we're talking with folks. Is there's this idea that because there's been some, like online booking solutions. We're a little bit different than just online booking, but that's sort of what people initially go to is, okay, online booking just doesn't really work for businesses like ours because we need a person in the loop. And I'll say, okay, tell me more about that. Like what's the person in the loop? And generally speaking, they have kind of two functions. One is a gatekeeper, right? So making sure that you're not sending your people out to unqualified leads, right? We can't waste our salespeople's time to driving out, sitting there to try to sell a job where, it's a full kitchen remodel and they have $1,000 budget. We need to make sure we're not wasting our time going out there. I mean, kind of the only way that they knew to do that is to have a conversation. So a lot of them would say, well, yeah, we need a person to pre-qualify. So like, we can't just open our calendar up to the whole internet. Our salespeople will be out wasting most of their time trying to sell to people that have, there's no potential of them ever even buying. And so a lot of times I would say, well, how do you pre-qualify? Say, well, we just kind of know, right? They're like, that's why, Janice, or that's why Kelsey or Jackson, that's their whole thing is like, they're really good at just knowing, right? And what's funny is then you'd go talk to those people and you'd kind of go, well, how do you pre-qualify? And they're like, well, it's just kind of a feeling. And a lot of times it was just like, look up a zip code and go, does that seem like, an area that we work in, right? And that was sort of the extent of their pre-qualification. So I've always found that sort of interesting is that one of the big things that people say is, well, we need to pre-qualify. And once you actually start digging in and ask, okay, well, what sort of criteria do you have? Like, what's sort of your approach to pre-qualification? It's usually much more rudimentary and probably a lot more getting through than they think is getting through. And on the other side of that, because you put this gatekeeper, in between and there's that friction there, sure, you might be keeping your salespeople from going to appointments they never should have went to, but also because you're adding all that friction, there's a lot of customers that you probably wanted to get in front of and probably could have sold to that you never got to because they just dropped out of your funnel because you made it too hard. So that's sort of the first thing to say, okay, we need a person in the middle to do this pre-qualification kind of gatekeeping component. And then the second is it's scheduling in a logistically smart way. So thinking about routing. And so they want to make sure that they're routing their team and making sure that they're not sending them from one end of the service area to the other and zigzagging across the map. Because especially in like post-sale things, like that's a cost center, right? If you've already closed the job, you got a deposit, you want to maximize, how much revenue, how much you keep, right? So paying somebody just to drive back and forth and have an uploaded field team because you're wasting your time on windshield time just doesn't make sense, right? And then from a sales side, you only have so many hours in a day that your salespeople can be selling. You want to make sure that every opportunity they're in front of is a good opportunity, right? And so understood all that. And most of the tools thus far just have not done that very well. And so there's this sort of belief that this won't work for us for those two reasons. And so that was really helpful and informative in what we built and what we're building still was why does that have to be the case for the industries that we're in? And most of the tools that are out on the market, or especially were in the market at the time, we're designed for more of a doing virtual calls. So like if you're setting up your SDRs to have a sales conversation, getting on a bad call because you're just jumping into a Zoom is fairly low risk, right? You still don't want to waste your time. You should still pre-qualify, but the risk is much lower. And you don't have the drive time aspect, right? So in the other industries, these work really well for traditional tools is, things like hair salons or massages or things like that, where, you can collect a deposit up front, they're scheduling a time, they're coming to you, right? So they work great for that. And most of the tools that have been offered traditionally to home service businesses are essentially the same exact thing. And so they don't really think about two of the most critical parts for us. And so there was a lot of sentiment around these types of tools and just this assumption and this belief that they fundamentally can't work for the trades. And I just didn't agree. And I was like, well, yeah, the tools today don't work for the trades, but that doesn't mean that they can't, right? And they should. So, because we've seen, you can go look up the data on the impact of essentially online booking and automating your scheduling for other industries. And the average is like 27% increase in top line revenue from just implementing online booking. So changing nothing else, but just letting customers book instantly. Something like 94% of customers will choose a business or a service provider that offers like an immediate booking option over one that doesn't. So the implications were huge. The problem was we just didn't have the tool set we needed to be able to capture that. So that was kind of a lot of the main feedback we got. And then just being able to learn from how they think about the logistics side of things, right? Because like I said, there's a bit of art and science to it. So how you think about routing, how you think about, again, a big one is leaving enough room and flexibility in the calendar for, slotting in the next appointment. Cause, let's use an example of, most of let's say your estimates that you do, you generally schedule for 45 minutes. Let's say that's just your standard estimate. So if you're scheduling an estimate and you've got a 2-hour block of time, depending on how much drive time there is in there and where you put that in that block, you may or may not be able to schedule another appointment in there. But if you put it right smack dab in the middle, you basically just built in an arbitrary 15 minutes that your person's going to be sitting in the driveway, where if you just moved it up or down, you could potentially put another appointment in there. So a lot of things that we were able to learn on how efficient schedulers think about scheduling that we were able to build into our algorithm to make sure that the scheduling outcomes from Drive are as good or better than, a seasoned person in your office would deliver.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you were able to codify the subjectiveness of scheduling into an intelligent algorithm.
Yeah.
One of the challenge I hear is like for the tradespeople selling software, the UI UX and simplicity has to be great. Like they
Mhm.
don't want to learn a new tool, the friction is high.
Right.
So how do you handle that?
Yeah, really good question. And it's true. And there's also a bit of tool fatigue, I would almost call it. And so there's this tension between I'll get to your question here. This is my path to it. So there's this tension between, I don't want more things, more tools that I'm managing and subscribing to. And also all-in-one solutions generally are really good at a few things and everything else they're not so great at, right? So there's this ideally we're minimizing the amount of tools we're paying for, minimizing our total spend in the tools that we're using, but also we need each of them to perform really well and they're sort of like each of these verticals of our business. And so that's kind of an interesting tension that we work within because we're not a full FSM, we're not a CRM, we don't necessarily intend to be. And so for us, the big thing has been, this is complicated. Scheduling is complicated. That's why most people, one of the most valuable people they have in their office or peoples are the ones that understand the calendars. All of our businesses operate on, how well do we manage the calendar and how well do we manage the field. So that's why you'll see a lot of these folks that are in these businesses, they've been there for 10, 15 years and they're invaluable because they have this institutional knowledge around how their calendars operate. So our kind of our biggest focus and ease of use is once we get things set up, how is it so easy just to keep getting things on the calendar? And we also focus on getting kind of that initial onboarding and setup to be simple, but we can only simplify it as much as the institutional knowledge is simple, if that makes sense, right? And so we're always working on ways to figure out how do we better sort of codify and extract all this institutional knowledge and get it into a more deterministic product that can deliver deterministic outcomes. And by deterministic, I mean, if you give it the same inputs, you get the same output every time. And we can talk more about that with general AI, because there's a lot of like AI scheduling and all these things out there right now. And one of the challenges with those is they're generally non-deterministic. So you can put in the same inputs and you don't always get the same output, which for a business like ours, that's a problem. We need to make sure that pre-qualification rules are, adhered to and followed, and also the way that we think about the calendar, that we're getting the same route optimized scheduling consistently from whatever we're using to schedule, whether it be a person or a product. And so our big thing was, okay, the interface that customers are booking. So if we're allowing customers to put appointments on your calendar, one, it needs to be very easy for them. We need to not have friction in there. So it's how do we ask as few questions as we need to get the outcome that we want, which is a qualified appointment on the calendar. And also through the flow of that, how can it mimic how you would talk to a scheduling coordinator? Because generally best practices in scheduling, you wouldn't just say, when do you want us to come out? Right? Because you have no idea what's on our calendar. Instead, a skilled scheduling person is going to guide you to a time and, offer you a few good options that you can choose from so that you're not overwhelmed with choice, but you've got enough choice that you'll go, yeah, one of those will work for me. And if you choose one of those options, like it's going to work great for us. Right. So that's sort of how we find the win-win. So that was a big focus of ours in this booking flow, because traditional booking tools, if you're using just like a booking interface, it'll just show you a big calendar. So you think about even most, booking tools, if, when we scheduled our meeting here, you're just looking at a calendar, right? But the implications are different for your type of scheduling that you're doing. But we would never over the phone just give a customer open access to like name a time and we'll just figure it out and get there. And so we needed to build a different flow that mimics that conversation. And so the initial screen, once they're pre-qualified and we know what type of thing we're booking and we've run the algorithm to go, okay, we kind of know every single slot we could schedule this in and the implications of each of those slots. We pick the best like 5 to 7 and go, do any of these work? And then they can say nope and start to dig in deeper, which really mimics how we would talk on the phone to make sure that the time that we negotiate between the two of us and that we get on the calendar is one that works for you, but also works for us as the business. And so that was our main focus. And then we're always focused on how do we make it easier and quicker to kind of get your institutional knowledge codified into Drive so that Drive can schedule like you would. And so a lot of that is basically built around, well, actually, I want to say too, we've been surprised at how comfortable most of these operators are in using sort of like a logic builder. Like it's a pretty easy, intuitive logic builder where you're essentially creating your routing and your qualification rules. And generally speaking, most people are able to understand that and navigate it really well and actually really like the fact that they can sort of like put it down and define it and know that they can trust it, to the point that most of them actually then transition to using it for all their scheduling, even if they're doing it over the phone, right? So it allows you to more quickly hire and train like receptionists or inbound call takers, call centers, because you basically have this flow that they can go through where you're getting that same outcome with every appointment that you're scheduling. And so we've seen a lot of value there, and it takes a little bit of time, but it's not a ton. And I think there's also a bit of respect that comes from the fact that it does take a little bit of effort, right? And it should. I think if we were trying to convince you, and I generally don't trust tools that are going, okay, you can take 20 years of institutional knowledge and this person that is irreplaceable in your business, and one, saying that they're going to replace them. We're not trying to replace them. I don't think that that's the goal. But two, that you can replace them and it's like 5-minute, 5-question interview from some AI chatbot that all of a sudden understands what this person, has figured out over 15 years. I just don't think that's reasonable or possible and doesn't build the kind of trust that you need to have the visibility into like how is it actually thinking, right? And so yeah, so we're always focused on how we make that easier, but I don't think the goal is in 2 minutes all of your institutional knowledge is in there and you can just start booking. I just don't think that's reasonable or people would trust it or should. So,
That also creates the level of trust because there's so many edge cases and the person always feel like now we're going like agent
yep,
orchestrators where we are seeing and
yeah,
managing the scenario. You also mentioned about like right now one let's say could use Claude and connect calendar and that can do some but there is so much institutional knowledge that scheduling logic which
mhm.
is being missed out so that can only do it to a limit. So, how has been the AI adoption concern among the trades industry? Do you have a FOMO, or they are like, "Let's if it works, if it solves my problem, I can adopt it."
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've been having a lot of conversations with a number of our customers and non-customers too, where it starts with talking about scheduling and then we'll get a lot of these like, hey, you guys seem to know a lot about AI, right? So how should we be using AI, right? And there's this general question of we think that we need to be using AI. Where should we be using AI? Which I think is an interesting thing because that's not normally how we would think, but there's a lot of this pressure around, AI is doing this, AI can do this. If you're on Twitter, for example, like you're getting just inundated and hammered all the time of, Claude, there's all these framings of like, Claude has a secret mode that can run all of your SEO, or Claude has a secret mode where it can be your best scheduling coordinator, right? And so there's this idea that, oh, we just need to be using AI. And so for most of these businesses, what they think of as AI is it's like it's Claude or it's ChatGPT, and they're just thinking like, what prompts do I need to give it? Some are starting to look at like agent building and things like that. But there is a lot of pressure to use AI in their business. But I don't think they're always starting with going, okay, where do I have areas of my business that there's problems I could solve or there's, improvements that could be made and thinking about what that looks like and asking the question, is AI the correct tool for that job? There's just a bit of like, we need to figure out where to plug AI in because that's what we should be doing. And I just don't think that's the right approach. And for a lot of these businesses, what we find is when they're thinking about AI, it's actually automation more than it is AI, right? AI might be a part of it, but it's essentially more automation. And so I would encourage a lot of them, learn more about automation. And so automation being, using Zapier, connecting tools or like an 8 or something like that, right? Automation is really powerful and important. And AI can play a part in that, but you need to understand a couple of things. And one of the main things is, generally speaking, AI as in, Claude, ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, Copilot, these like interfaces that you interface with an AI, they're at the same time like can be the best employee and the worst employee. And why I say they can be the best employee is because they always want to and essentially will get the job done and they want to make you happy. Right. Those are two things like we want out of an employee, right? It's like, do they want to, like get the job done and do they want to make me and the business happy? Right. The problem with that is they are so like motivated to get the job done and to make you happy that they'll take shortcuts or, we call it hallucinate, like they might make things up. And again, they're non-deterministic. So like I said before, like the inputs, you could literally take the same like financial report and go, create me a forecast. And you could just open up two different chats that are both Claude, give it a thing, and it'll, make these assumptions and it'll have two different assumptions. And you're like, how are these 40% off? Well, because it's just doing things right. And so you have to be careful where you use it. And that's not to say it's bad or dangerous or that you shouldn't be thinking about it, but I think the correct approach is, okay, where are places in the business that we could, put in automation or leverage AI because I understand the problem that we have and the opportunity for us to be more efficient, more effective, and ask yourself the question, is AI the right tool for this? Or is there some other tool we should be using? I think first and foremost, that's one of the most important things. And that's where even Drive for us, a lot of people go, okay, so it's an AI scheduler. And we say, well, no, actually it's not, right? It works well with AI. So you can give ChatGPT Drive and essentially give ChatGPT Drive's brain. But the most important thing is we're giving ChatGPT a deterministic brain. So the, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, interface you're using to chat with it is essentially just the conversational layer between you. And it's basically giving Drive a voice that you can have a conversation with it. But at the end of the day, it's Drive's brain that is doing the thinking. And that's what we need, right? You want to make sure that you can trust the outputs because scheduling, for example, there is a lot of, these sort of like front office agent or, your CSR, SDR agent, voice AI receptionists, right? That are coming into the market. Some are better than others. Generally speaking, the problem is that most of them are essentially just a series of prompts and skills that are wrapped on top of, ChatGPT, Claude, some LLM, so large language model. So that's like the AI agent behind the thing you're chatting with, right? And like I said, the problem with that is that still is that employee that wants to make you happy and just wants to get the job done. And so you can try to put in, here's exactly how we qualify. You can give it a knowledge base. You can give it, skills that, sort of define. You have to always ask this. But just like an employee, you can say, hey, Mayur, you always, when you're taking an inbound call, here's all the questions you need to ask to pre-qualify. Eventually you're going to get to this place where you're like, well, actually, most of the time they always say yes to this. So like, I'm going to eliminate that question and just stop asking it. Right. And then, 2 months later, we're sitting there and I'm checking in. I'm your boss and we're going, how's this going? And I'm like, why are we never asking this? What happened? And you're like, oh, well, I just decided not to do it. Right. Sometimes a good team member even will do that where they just start to go, we have a very strict process and they start to sort of alter the process to become more efficient at their work. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. The good thing with you is we could have a conversation about that and you go, okay, got it. I understand. AI, you can't do that. You can try to tell it and then eventually like it just might forget and just quit doing it. I think a good example is right now, if you were to go open whatever AI you use, so ChatGPT or Claude, any of them, and you just go in there and you type in, schedule me an appointment with custom lines and design. What it will do is it'll say, what are you looking for? So it'll scrape our website. It'll say, okay, I understand who custom lines and design is. I understand what services they offer. It'll try to come up with these questions to ask you. And it'll say, well, when would you like an appointment? Are you looking at morning or afternoon? And you'll say, oh, I want mornings. Right. And it'll say, okay, are you like any day of the week or prefer a weekend? You go, ideally on a Saturday. It will create an appointment on your calendar for Saturday, but it never talked to us. Right. And so it goes, all right, I've put an appointment on your calendar for Saturday at 9. You'll need to call Custom Lines and Design to confirm that appointment. And if you're not paying attention, you might just show up or expect someone to show up at your house, not realizing Claude didn't actually talk to us at all or book anything. It just got the job done that it thought that you wanted it to do. So the same thing can happen even with these voice AI agents. Like you can talk to some of them and you can go, it's asking you questions and you just go, you know what? I don't want to answer the question. Just get me a time on the calendar. Well, I have a few other questions for you. And you can go, no, just give me an appointment at 9 on Saturday with any salesperson. Okay, and it'll do it, right? Because these are not they're not hard-coded rules, and there's not a rigid process in the back end that it has to follow to get to the outcome that it wants. And so if the layer between the inputs and the output that you want are just prompts, they are not going to reliably deliver what you want, right? And so that's one of the important things for us was, AI does have a place in this. AI is a great conversational layer. We have our own voice AI agent that we're launching. We also have people that use, Go High Level, Fappy that run their own agencies that sell voice AI agents that are plugging Drive in as as the back end brain behind their scheduling tools. Because that's a lot of what AI is lacking, like is that deterministic, rigid sort of thing. And so whether it's scheduling or anything else, I would say make sure that you're either using a tool that has AI built into it, that they've kind of created the rails because their products. So like whether it be, like forecasting, some bookkeeping tools and things have an AI agent within it that you can sort of have a conversation with. By nature, that is going to be more deterministic and more reliable on the outcomes that it produces than if you just export your P&L and paste it in Claude and go create me a forecast, right? So just learning and thinking about like where to deploy AI, which AI to use, and making sure like if this is a thing that you need reliable, consistent outcomes, you're probably going to need some sort of tool or thing that AI is using and sort of creates the rules and structures that it has to deliver a consistent outcome. So does that make sense? That was kind of
Yeah,
a
the
monologue.
examples were very helpful and to understand the limitation also.
Yeah.
Quinn, we have a rapid fire round to do a wrap up. You have less than 5 seconds to answer.
Okay.
Your favorite restaurant?
My favorite restaurant is in Lincoln. It's the Oven in downtown Lincoln. So great Indian food.
Any book which made a big impact in your life?
Ooh, any book that's made an impact in my life. I mean, early on, like any Marty Kagan, I don't read it as much now, but like that was kind of the foundation of me learning about just how to build. So, and like lean startup, some of those, so like learning lean agile.
Your favorite movie?
My favorite movie, Les Mis. I guess I didn't love the movie as much, but I love that play and just the story arc of Les Mis.
Any city or country which is in your travel bucket list?
Ooh, bucket list. Let's see. Two places I'd like to get back to would be Livingston, Zambia. If you've never been, it's awesome. It's beautiful. And that would be one. And then Sierra, Greece. little island in Greece.
3 words your best friend would describe you as.
Ooh, 3 words my best friend described me as. Night owl, I hope reliable, and listener. That's what I would hope they would say.
A piece of advice to your 18-year-old self.
Oh man, it's all gonna be okay. I think that would be it. It's just like things work out if you keep pushing. So like less worry about what could happen and more focus on, what would you like to see happen and pursue the things you want rather than worrying about, the things that you don't want to happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Quinn, for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to meet you and good to chat.
Likewise.